He is the golden age. He is the epitome of everything that made ancient Egypt brilliant.
What researchers found in Amenhotep III's DNA reveals a strange family mystery, a discovery that stunned even Dr. Zahi Hawass, the man leading Egypt's most ambitious genetic study. When his team extracted DNA from the royal mummies of the 18th dynasty, they weren't prepared for what they saw under the microscope. The results exposed a pattern that rewrote everything historians believed about Egypt's most powerful pharaohs. It wasn't treasure or tombs this time. It was blood. And what Amenhotep's DNA revealed about his own family is something no ancient record ever dared to mention. The pharaoh who defined an era. Long before Tutan's name became synonymous with gold and mystery, there was Amenhotep III, the man whose DNA would one day reveal one of Egypt's strangest family secrets. He turned Egypt into the most dazzling empire the world had ever seen. His reign, stretching from around 1390 to 1353 BC, wasn't marked by endless wars or chaos, but by something far more powerful: prosperity. Art, architecture, and luxury flourished under his rule. The temples at Luxor rose like poems carved in stone, and his palaces were described as places where the gods themselves wished to live. Egyptians believed that Amenhotep was the physical embodiment of the sun god Ra. His smile was carved onto statues that towered above the Nile, radiating calm authority. But behind that serene face was a man driven by legacy. He wanted to create a dynasty that would be eternal, a bloodline so pure, so sacred that it would blur the line between human and God. Amenhotep took Queen T, a woman of intelligence and political skill, as his great royal wife. Unlike many queens, she wasn't merely a symbolic consort. T was his equal in almost every sense. Her name appeared alongside his on monuments, decrees, and diplomatic letters. Foreign kings wrote directly to her, a rare acknowledgement of her power in a male-dominated world. Together, they redefined royal partnership, but they also set into motion a genetic experiment of divine ambition that would echo for generations. Their union produced several children, including princes and princesses, whose names are still debated by scholars. Among them was a son who would change Egypt forever, Amenhotep IV, later known as Akhenaten, the pharaoh who rejected the old gods and built a city in honor of one. Yet even this revolutionary was born under the shadow of his father's vision, a vision that prized bloodline above all else. The royal family was believed to carry divine essence in its veins, and to preserve it, marriages were often kept within the family. Brother married sister, cousin married cousin. The gods, they said, approved such unions. At the height of his reign, Amenhotep III ruled a kingdom so powerful that neighboring nations sent tribute just to stay in his favor. He built over 250 monuments, some dedicated to the gods, others to himself. His two colossal statues, the Colossi of Memnon, still stand today, their cracked faces staring across the desert like silent guardians of forgotten secrets. But while the outer world saw perfection, the royal household was quietly entangling itself in something far more complex. No one could have imagined that 3,000 years later, modern science would peel back the layers of that legacy. When archaeologists unwrapped Amenhotep's mummy in the late 19th century, they were astonished by how well preserved he was, regal, even in death. For decades, his remains were admired as relics of Egypt's golden age. But the real revelation didn't come until 2010, when geneticists extracted DNA from his bones. They weren't just searching for identification, they were tracing a bloodline. What they uncovered in that genetic code sent shock waves through history, because hidden in those strands of ancient DNA was a story the walls of his tomb never told, a family mystery buried for millennia. The kind of mystery that redefines how we understand power, inheritance, and the very price of being divine. Amenhotep III's legacy wasn't only written in stone, it was written in his genes. And what scientists would one day find inside them would prove that even the gods of Egypt had secrets they could not keep. Hotep's mummy, discovered in the late 19th century, had been examined countless times, yet what lay within it remained untold. That changed in 2010, when a group of Egyptian and international scientists attempted something revolutionary, extracting DNA from Egypt's royal mummies. It was an experiment that would bridge the gap between ancient legend and modern science. The project, led by Dr. Zahawaz and the Supreme Council of Antiquities, had one goal: to uncover the genetic secrets of the 18th dynasty and map the family of the mysterious boy king, Tutankhamun. If successful, it would settle centuries of debate about his origins, his health, and his connection to the powerful rulers before him. At the center of this investigation stood one man, Amenhotep III. His DNA would serve as the foundation for decoding the entire royal bloodline. But before science could resurrect the truth, it had to overcome time itself. Ancient DNA is notoriously fragile, especially under Egypt's relentless desert heat. Every strand had to be handled with surgical precision. Researchers wore full protective gear, gloves, masks, and sterile suits, as they worked in sealed labs to prevent contamination. Even a single modern fingerprint could ruin the entire study. 11 royal mummies were tested, each identified only by a code. Among them were Amenhotep III, Queen T, an unidentified male from tomb KV55, and a mysterious woman from tomb KV35. The names were withheld to keep the science unbiased. Every bone sample was analyzed multiple times, every result cross-checked in independent labs. When the data started coming in, one pattern began to emerge. Some of the genetic markers traced back to a single source, Amenhotep III. His DNA was appearing in connections no one expected. There were shared alleles linking him to multiple mummies, forming a web of relationships that couldn't easily be explained by known family trees. Dr. Hawaz and his team were cautious, careful not to jump to conclusions. Still, something about the results didn't fit the accepted narrative. There were gaps in history that suddenly looked suspiciously deliberate. The hieroglyphs had told one version of royal succession: clean, orderly, divine. The DNA, on the other hand, hinted at something far more complicated. By the time the preliminary reports were complete, one thing was clear: Amenhotep III's genetic fingerprints were everywhere. But the deeper question remained unanswered. What did they mean? The inscriptions on Tutankhamun's tomb were vague, incomplete, and in some cases deliberately erased. The Amarna period was a time when names disappeared overnight, when history itself was rewritten to protect those in power. Some believed Tutankhamun was the son of Akhenaten, the pharaoh who defied Egypt's ancient religion. Others insisted the connection was weaker, maybe through a lesser-known royal branch. Without clear inscriptions, no theory held firm. Only one thing was certain: his family was far more entangled than anyone had imagined. Two mummies became central to the mystery: the young male from tomb KV55, whose elongated skull and delicate features suggested he could be Akhenaten himself, and the younger lady from tomb KV35, whose refined features marked her as royal but whose identity was unknown. Years passed without answers. Theories multiplied. Some pointed to Nefertiti, others to Kia, or even an unnamed daughter of Amenhotep III. Each theory solved one piece of the puzzle, but created another. Then came the DNA. When scientists compared Tutankhamun's genetic code with those of the unidentified mummies, strange repeating similarities emerged. Tutankhamun shared markers with both the KV55 male and the younger lady. But that wasn't what caught the scientists' attention. It was how those two individuals also linked back to a single genetic line, one that led straight to Amenhotep III. The deeper they looked, the more tangled the picture became, as if the same set of genes kept looping through generations. The inscription said nothing about it. The tomb stayed silent. Yet the DNA spoke clearly. Dr. Hawaz later admitted that the findings were both thrilling and unnerving. It was like history itself was whispering, he said. But the whispers didn't yet form a complete sentence. Something about Tutankhamun's lineage didn't just connect him to Amenhotep III. It depended on him in ways that defied logic. And when the final tests were run, the truth that emerged stunned even the scientists who uncovered it. What the DNA revealed wasn't a simple case of ancestry. It was a genetic paradox that forever changed how we see Egypt's royal bloodline. No one on Dr. Hawaz's team could believe what they were seeing. Every DNA test came back the same. When they finally overlaid all the data, the truth snapped into focus like a long-buried inscription finally deciphered. Here's what they found in Amenhotep III's DNA that reveals a strange family mystery, and it was unbelievable. The golden pharaoh of Egypt wasn't just Tutankhamun's ancestor, he was both of his grandparents. The results confirmed what no inscription had dared to record. Amenhotep III and Queen T were not only the rulers who shaped Egypt's most powerful dynasty, they were the parents of both the KV-55 male and the younger lady. Those two, in turn, were the biological father and mother of Tutankhamun. In a single discovery, science had uncovered a truth that rewrote history. Tutankhamun's parents were full siblings, both direct children of Amenhotep III. The revelation was staggering. For generations, Egyptologists had debated whether Akhenaten, the radical pharaoh of Amarna, was Tutankhamun's father. The DNA evidence confirmed that the KV-55 male, almost certainly Akhenaten, shared exactly half his genetic markers with Amenhotep III, fitting perfectly as his son. But what no one expected was the second connection. The younger lady, long thought to be a minor royal or even Nefertiti herself, carried the exact same parental DNA. What was meant to make the royal line eternal had instead sealed it into a genetic loop. Dr. Hawaz described the moment of confirmation as a discovery that left the entire team silent. The DNA was irrefutable. Every independent test confirmed the same pattern. The alleles inherited by Tutankhamun matched perfectly with those of his parents and both traced directly back to Amenhotep III. No other combination fit. It was an exact genetic equation, elegant, mathematical, and devastating. The implications stretched far beyond genealogy. It wasn't just that Tutankhamun's parents were siblings. It was that this had been the accepted, even sanctified, practice among the ruling family. In the theology of ancient Egypt, the pharaoh wasn't merely human, he was a living god. And gods in their mythology often married their own sisters to preserve divine essence. What the priests once called holiness, modern science now called genetic isolation. It changed everything historians believed about how far the 18th dynasty went to keep its blood pure. It also explained why so many physical disorders had surfaced in the mummies of that period. From skeletal deformities to evidence of congenital disease, the so-called curse of the pharaohs may have been less about tombs and magic and more about what happens when devotion to the divine collides with biology. What makes this discovery so haunting is that it humanized the gods of Egypt. The great Amenhotep III, whose statues still tower over the desert, wasn't just the symbol of perfection. He was the origin of a flaw hidden in plain sight. His DNA became both a foundation and a warning, a testament to how power, when bound too tightly to purity, can destroy what it seeks to preserve. In the end, the revelation did more than identify Tutan's parents. It forced the world to see Egypt's most sacred dynasty not as distant gods, but as a family, brilliant, ambitious, and tragically entangled in its own blood. And for the first time in over 3,000 years, the truth had spoken. Not through hieroglyphs, not through legend, but through the language of DNA. When the DNA results were published, the revelation hit like a sandstorm across the world of Egyptology. The majestic image of divine rulers, radiant in gold, untouched by mortal imperfection, suddenly gave way to a harsh biological reality. The pharaohs weren't gods in human form. They were humans struggling under the weight of divine expectations. The evidence was clear. Generations of inbreeding within the royal bloodline had come at a price, one that Tutankhamun's body bore in full. Modern CT scans of Tutankhamun's remains revealed a young man far more fragile than the glorious artifacts in his tomb suggested. His left foot was clubbed inward, a condition known as equinus deformity. His femur and foot bones showed signs of necrosis, areas of dead tissue where blood no longer flowed. He likely walked with a limp, supported by canes, many of which were found among his burial treasures. His teeth were uneven, his palate slightly clefted, and his immune system likely weakened. To the untrained eye, he appeared regal. To medical experts, he was the tragic product of a genetic bottleneck. These physical conditions, now understood through DNA and radiology, are exactly what you would expect in a lineage where the same genes circulate too closely for too long. When siblings or close relatives reproduce, harmful recessive traits that would normally remain hidden can surface in their children. The royal belief in divine blood, intended to preserve holiness, had in truth preserved fragility. Amenhotep III's dynasty had made its body the vessel of the gods, but in doing so, it also became a vessel of its own decline. The desire to keep the bloodline pure had weakened it. By the time Tutankhamun ascended to the throne, the once mighty 18th dynasty was already cracking beneath the weight of its own genetic isolation. The irony is impossible to ignore. The same purity that symbolized divine legitimacy became the reason the line nearly extinguished itself. Historical records describe Tutankhamun as a ruler who tried to restore balance after his father Akhenaten's radical reforms. He reopened temples, reinstated traditional deities, and brought stability back to Egypt. But behind the scenes, he was sickly and frail, often confined by pain. His reign ended abruptly at around age 19. There was no sign of violence or conspiracy in his death, only the quiet, inevitable end of a young man born with too much history in his blood. Archaeologists later found that several of Amenhotep III's descendants showed similar traits: elongated skulls, delicate jaws, and symmetrical features that had long fascinated artists and scientists alike. The so-called Amarna style of art, which depicted the royal family with exaggerated heads and slender bodies, may not have been entirely symbolic. It could have been a reflection of how they truly looked. If so, what was once thought to be divine stylization may actually have been an artistic record of genetic deformities expressed in stone. But the consequences weren't only physical, they were political. When Tutankhamun died, the dynasty had no strong heirs. Power shifted rapidly between advisors, generals, and distant relatives, setting off a chain of instability that eventually led to the fall of the 18th dynasty itself. In the end, divine purity proved unsustainable even for kings. The irony of Amenhotep III's legacy is haunting. He had wanted to make his blood eternal, and in a way, he succeeded, just not as he imagined. His DNA, preserved for over 3 millennia, became the key to unlocking the truth about his family. It told a story that temples never could, one written in molecules rather than hieroglyphs. The golden age he built now reads differently. Behind the monuments and the myths lies a sobering truth. The perfection Egypt once worshipped was, in reality, its undoing. The gods of stone may have endured, but the people who carried their blood could not. And as scientists continued studying those fragile strands of DNA, one question lingered in the air. If divine blood was the key to immortality, why did it leave behind such mortal scars? The revelation of Amenhotep III's DNA didn't just solve a mystery. It cracked open a dynasty's soul. For centuries, the 18th dynasty had been painted as the golden age of Egypt, the height of civilization, beauty, and divine power. But the truth hidden in those ancient genes revealed something much more human. It told a story of ambition, faith, and a family that believed it could outsmart time itself. Dr. Zahi Hawass later described the moment of discovery as both triumphant and unsettling. "We were looking at history's most successful family," he said, "and we found the secret that nearly destroyed it." The DNA evidence not only connected Amenhotep III to both of Tutankhamun's parents, it exposed how generations of royal inbreeding had weakened the very blood they sought to preserve. What began as a spiritual pursuit to keep the line of the gods pure had become a biological trap. This revelation changed how historians viewed Egypt's collapse at the end of the 18th dynasty. The internal fractures weren't just political, they were personal, hereditary, and physical. The last pharaohs of that line were not the invincible beings their carvings portrayed, but fragile descendants of a divine experiment gone wrong. Tutankhamun's early death left no surviving heirs, and with him, the royal bloodline of Amenhotep III effectively ended. The throne passed to military officials and advisors, marking the slow but certain fall of Egypt's most extraordinary family. Still, the paradox of Amenhotep's legacy endures. He was a ruler who raised Egypt to its greatest height and unknowingly laid the groundwork for its genetic downfall. His monuments still dominate the landscape, massive, serene, timeless, as if to insist that perfection can last forever. Yet the science tells a different story. Inside his DNA, the same perfection he sought carried the flaw that would bring his dynasty to an end. Even today, researchers continue to study the genetic map first drawn from his mummified bones. Every new discovery adds another layer to the story, not just of Egypt, but of humanity itself. It reminds us that power, no matter how divine it claims to be, is still subject to nature's design. The pharaohs may have built pyramids to defy death, but their own blood carried its own hidden curse. Amenhotep III's story now stands as one of history's greatest contradictions. He was a man who believed he had mastered both life and death, a god among mortals, a visionary who tried to make eternity his inheritance. And in a way, he succeeded. His DNA, recovered thousands of years later, became immortal in its own right. But immortality came with a price. The same blood that once ruled Egypt now whispers a warning that even the mightiest empires can be undone from within. The golden pharaoh's dynasty may have faded into dust, but the truth uncovered in his DNA ensures his story will never die again. If Amenhotep III's quest for divine perfection ended up weakening the very dynasty he built, what other secrets might still be hidden in the DNA of ancient rulers? And how many more of history's legends might crumble once science starts to read their bloodlines? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.